Brilliant. Thank you so much, Edouard. Let me just start timing myself, because with your timekeeping skills, people will not get lunch today. So let me just if I can just shift all of the thanks, your very kind thanks for the South African work to Joe, who not only helped me with this presentation, but also has been truly amazing to work with and done a lot of work. In fact, most of the work that the South African team has done is due to her. So if I can just do this. So I just want to clarify that what I'm going to be really talking about is decolonizing philosophy through the Geography of Philosophy project, because of course that's the only way to do experimental philosophy, right? And what I aim to do is in particular to show off its potential to contribute to decolonizing philosophy. And I'm really hoping that I won't have to explain why this is an important project in light of recent developments. I'm only talking about the potential of the Geography of Philosophy project, in case you're wondering, because of course, it was not designed with that in mind in the first place. So what I'm going to do is first talk a little bit about my conception of what I take the decolonization of philosophy to involve. And those of you who are non-philosophers, don't worry, there won't be any technicalities. There certainly won't be any talk of rigid designation at all. I'll be then discussing the Geography of Philosophy's current contribution to this project. And then I'll talk about further opportunities that we have as a whole, I think, to really contribute worldwide to the decolonization project. So in line with the promise to keep things simple, I'm going to be taking my cue in thinking about the decolonization of philosophy from two bodies of scholarship. Well, they're really overlapping bodies of scholarship, one on epistemic decolonization and the other one on conceptual or linguistic decolonization. And by epistemic decolonization, I've certainly argued in my work, we should really understand fundamentally a project of recentering or reclaiming our right and ability to think and theorize from our own geographic and sociocultural location. So in other words, we get to choose the focus of our epistemic endeavors in accordance with our own conceptual schemas, our own social identities, and attendant interests, rather than these things being imposed on us by the former colonizers. And there are various ways of spelling out this idea. I mean, this is just part of the, so this is the negative part of the project, as Kwasi Wiredu has distinguished. So Achille Mbembe, for example, thinks of it as rejecting the assumption, this is a quote, that the modern West is the central root of Africa's consciousness and cultural heritage, as well as the idea that Africa is merely an extension of the West. And I take it that, just to spoil the ending of the story, this is one of the places where the Geography of Philosophy is very well placed to contribute, rejecting this assumption. So this is the way this notion of recentering plays itself out in Africa, but it's certainly present in other decolonial scholarship, for example, in the olden Latin America scholarship, such as the Walter Mignola's notion of epistemic disobedience. Edouard, can I just ask you, I know that there was a problem with the volume yesterday. Can you hear me okay? I know it's a little late. Okay.
We can hear you very well.
Okay, great, thanks. So Mignola's idea of epistemic disobedience is this rejection of what he calls the 0 point, or a kind of universalist conception of knowledge, according to which the knowing subject is disembodied and dislocated. It's kind of really the Cartesian image of the knower. And then the point that many decolonial and also feminist theorists have pushed is that that's the kind of conception that the global north or the west, or whatever you want to call it, propounds as neutral, but in fact is a reflection of its own geo-socio-political position, and it has been very instrumental in colonizing various places. And so, of course, you might, those of you who have been paying attention over the last 3 days might already see that the geography of philosophy is perfectly placed to aid in about that part of the project. And finally, in India, this notion is also present in Chatterjee's work, for example, who thinks of it as the global south, or at least the particular places in the global south, finding their voices as producers as opposed to consumers of modernity, or if you don't like the language, of knowledge. So that's what I want to take away from the epistemic decolonization debate. What I want to take from the conceptual decolonization is this idea of quasi-veredus. This is a quote again, the elimination from our thought of modes of conceptualization that came to us through colonization and remain in our thinking owing to inertia rather than to our own reflective choices. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but he really puts, again, this is the negative project, but he puts it very nicely, and I'm going to quote him at a bit at some length, because he really spells out very nicely the idea that languages basically fix what you find philosophically interesting. So languages, he says, carry their own kinds of philosophical suggestiveness, which foreign as well as native speakers are apt to take for granted. If by virtue of a colonial history, you're philosophically trained right from the beginning in a foreign language, then certain basic ways of thought that seem natural to native speakers might become natural to you. Consequently, you might not even realize that those ways of thinking may not be at all natural, or if your own language is radically different, even coherent from the standpoint of your own language. So, and those of you who know his work, he has spent his career discussing various concepts for which certain questions simply don't make sense in his native tongue, Akan, a Ghanaian language. And here's just to make the hair on epistemologists' neck stand, here are the concepts that don't make the questions we ask in the Western context or in the Anglo-Saxon context, don't make much sense in Akan. Truth, fact, opinion, belief, knowledge, this is one of our concepts, faith, doubt, certainty, and so on. And of course, so this is where I feel that also the geography of philosophy will be very well placed to help us understand this connection between the importance of language, the language you speak, and the importance of certain philosophical projects. And I think that the talk by Pablo just now already is gesturing in the ways in which the geography of philosophy can do this. So, so just to kind of unify these ideas, what I think we should mean by decolonizing philosophy is that, at a minimum at least, the philosophy in a particular geographical space, let's say in Africa, must restore the epistemic authority to African philosophical voices. And that involves, given the project of epistemic decolonization, rejecting the universalist conception of knowledge, to stop treating African thought in this case as an extension of the West, and to make African thought a contributor rather than a mere consumer of knowledge. And from the conceptual decolonization project, we basically get the idea that we need to stop letting the Western conceptual and linguistic resources exclusively shape our philosophical thinking. So that's the decolonization of philosophy project as I understand it, at its minimal, right? It's not the full thing, but it's at the very least, it needs to achieve this. So where is the geography of philosophy's contribution? Hopefully you know what the project is about, but in case you weren't paying attention, it is, according to its inceptors, an ambitious project in a recent paper which empirically investigates the concepts of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom across cultures, languages, religions, and socioeconomic groups. And the starting point, which is really important for this talk, and well, it's very important for the project as well, is that we stop assuming the universality of philosophical concepts, because whether these concepts are universal is an empirical matter, and so it needs empirical research. And this is the standard assumption driving experimental philosophy. So the idea that enough armchair philosophy, let's actually go out there and see what people's concepts really are. And this is something that Daniel was discussing very nicely yesterday as well, the role of experimental philosophy in this. And the motivation, according to this recent paper written by the main PIs, is threefold for rejecting this assumption. And the first one is, or at least examining this assumption. And the first one is that whether concepts are universal fixes the possibility of cross-cultural communication. So, you know, if they're really radical different concepts, as some African philosophers, for example, are suggesting, then cross-cultural communication becomes, at its worst, impossible. And secondly, this question also fixes certain assumptions we make about the architecture of mind and the kinds of attributions of mental states we make to each other. But I'm not going to really discuss these two motivations. The one that really is important for this talk is that whether certain concepts are universal is going to fix the significance of philosophical projects. So, for example, something like what Pablo was discussing right now about there not being any a word for truth in Quechua means that basically a lot of epistemology is going to turn out to be not so interesting to Quechua speakers, because it concerns how we think about truth, right? This is obviously an oversimplification, but I think that the basic point is right. And this is hopefully reminding you of Kwasi Wiredu's idea that what language you speak fixes the importance of what kind of philosophical projects you find important. So that's one place where the geography of philosophy is making an important contribution to the decolonial project in conceptual decolonization. But of course, it's also making an important contribution to the epistemic decolonization. If you recall, Mignolo at least thought of epistemic decolonization precisely as the rejection of this kind of universalist conception of knowledge and presumably other philosophical concepts. And a third place where the geography of philosophy is well placed to contribute, of course, is the kinds of sites at which it explores these concepts. You may have noticed that a lot of these sites are, in fact, well, some would like to say ex-colonial places. Others of us would like to call them still colonial, but I don't want to really have that fight. Let's say ex-colonial places for those who are inclined in this way. I'm not going to point them out to you in case there's a debate about it. So these are the ways in which the geography of philosophy, I think, is contributing to the decolonial project. But I think that we can do even better. So there's plenty of stuff that we could be still doing, and I want to talk about all of this stuff by reference to some of the studies that we've been running. So first of all, what have we learned from these studies? One of the things that we've definitely learned, or at least I hope we've learned, is that we still tend to be very West-centric in the way we set up the studies. So let me just give you one example. So the demographic questions we ask, fortunately, we ask them at the end, so hopefully they don't spoil the studies too much, but they make certain assumptions that it could be decentral, de-Westernized. So to give you an example of one of them, so this is a question about what range is the annual income of your household, and it starts with 15,000 to 25,000. Here is what sociologists in South Africa ask instead. So they say, how would you describe the socioeconomic category of your family's household? And the first thing that you're given a choice to tick is cannot or can only rarely provide for basic needs, or have help from other sources to do so. And in fact, in the first wave, we were allowed to replace this questionnaire with our sociology stuff for study 11 at least. And then in the second wave, we replaced it with, again, we were allowed, you'll be pleased to hear, with more realistic numbers for our environment. And to tell you what this means basically that the minimum category was under 700 US dollars annual income, whereas the second best was more like the minimum category that the original questionnaire was asking. So that's one place. This is still certain assumptions and West-centric ideas that are driving the studies that we could be more sensitive to. We also still tend to promote white normativity in some of the studies. So, for example, in study 4, which is involves the mind in the eyes test, all the images are from British 1990s magazines, and of course they're all of white people. And a lot of the videos, in fact, all the videos, feature hardly any Black people, lots of model minority people, and people who'd be racialized as not white in the US and Europe, but in fact, to an African participant would look white. So there's still this idea that this is the norm, whiteness. And you might think, okay, so we're being a bit precious here. Well, so what? Well, so I think that lots of what. So first of all, it affects the optics, I think, of the geography of philosophy. So it creates this kind of impression of feigned concern with universal audiences. So, oh, here we have diversity in our images, but actually we don't from certain locations. I think it affects the scientific status of what we're doing as well. So you can't really, so we know that we're better at reading familiar faces. So if there's less recognition in a particular community than in another, is it the concept doing the nasty, or is it the lack of familiarity with the faces that we're trying to test the concepts through? And obviously the final one is that it affects our ethics, right? So it enforces the idea that white is the norm, which, as we know from both Du Bois and Charles Mills, is the key to sustaining white privilege, white ignorance, white dominance, and so on. So we could be thinking a little bit about that aspect of the studies as well. And the final thing that we have learned, hopefully, is that we still tend to impose Western categories in our studies. So Anna Dorfman very nicely introduced study 11 yesterday and discussed it at length. So here it is again, the famous, except in our case, it wasn't Carlos, it was Siyabonga. And he's asking, this is the vignette where he's asking his neighbor if he can help him prepare his field, and so on and so on. And then participants are given a question, a set of options from which they're supposed to choose. So please choose the way. The first question is the way to handle the situation that you consider the wisest. Which way to handle the situation would you use? And which way to handle the situation would most people from your cultural background use? And again, Anna gave us some nice results there. Now we're given these 4 options, A, B, C, and D, deliberation. So she gave us the full blurb there, but the bottom line is that you're going to spend time reflecting on the situation on your own. Intuition, So you're going to tune into your feelings and emotions again on your own. And then there's the close others option. So you're going to get the opinion of your friends on the situation. And finally, there's the wisdom of crowds that Igor was saying it wasn't even worth testing for. He thought and then discovered to his horror that we just get it wrong all the time. So so here's what the South African result looked like. And the result itself doesn't particularly matter for the purposes of this talk. The point is that the ranking was deliberation was first, intuition way first. So 60% of participants did this for questions 1 and 2, because of course we all know that we're the wisest. So these two gelled across sites anyway, the answers to those. But when you looked at the Likert scale, so to what extent would choosing each way to handle the situation make you feel good about yourself, the result was quite different. So the ranking suddenly flipped around to close others being on the top. If there's, if these differences are statistically significant, which there's some doubt about. But either way, the point is that we have some kind of discrepancy in people's attitudes, internal discrepancy in people's attitudes towards wisdom. Sorry, in this case, it was wisdom. So why? I mean, people, we know that we're generally rational, but it's not that bad, typically. And we think that there are basically two sets of potentially foreign categories that are being employed in foreign for our site at least. And the first one is the exclusive choice of these 4 options. So here are some, and across all 3 first questions, obviously. So what's conspicuously absent and what would be a lot more natural in our environment would be to call the family council. So by which we don't mean mom and dad and sister and brother, but like the entire family with the uncles and the aunts and the elders in the family. You would consult the ancestors as well through a seer. You would consult the elders in the village in a more rural background. So these are not options that are being given as part of the questions. So and the second foreign category is the use of Likert scales. And in fact, I myself, so both South African and India's translator Rukmini was also in our last online workshop when she was reporting similar troubles. And since then, I've actually started doubting my own grasp on the Likert scale. So like, to what extent do I believe that Edouard is in the room? I don't know, like not very strongly. I just believe it or I don't, right? But these are at all events, certainly forgetting about my feelings about this, categories that may be considered problematic and West-centric that we're imposing in the study. So we're still taking these, we're going to different sites, but we're still taking these categories with us. So you might say, well, come on, like obviously we have to, we need the uniformity across sites. So we need to a great extent, assume these categories in order to gauge genuine cultural differences in the same concepts. And because the concepts are the global norms, it makes sense to design our studies around those. And it might be not seen as fair, this kind of, I wouldn't say criticism because I'm just pointing out opportunities, because the geography of philosophy, in fact, has studies that invite category diversity at least. And I think that that's quite right. And what I'm going to suggest now is that we should use those to show us the way forward. So the way forward is, I think, at least from what I've argued in this last bit, is don't presuppose the categories, but go and find them. And we already had both this, morning for you, and yesterday, some suggestions about how one can do this. But we also have within the studies themselves certain ways that are quite friendly to finding categories instead of imposing them. And one of them is study one. Where you're asking participants, for example, for each of the three concepts, here's the example of wisdom, whether various loose questions. So is there a particular part of the body that's used for being wise? How do people become wise? Can children be born wise? And so on. And also people are asked in study one to do free associations with wisdom and cognate concepts. Here's one of the isiZulu examples, and here's one of the Afrikaans examples. So these are ways in which some of the studies are already taking us in the right direction. So I feel, and so of course then we could just apply this idea to other studies. So here, instead of having just 4 options, we can have a 5th option where it says other, please specify. And then you just have a little space saying, well, which way to handle the situation did you have in mind? And here is where, if I heard it was Steve yesterday who pointed out that he can now write in that he asked Jesus what he would say, or something like this. It was Steve, right?
Never.
Okay, so anyway, so obviously this will be a pilot study. It wouldn't be actually going around on all the sites and asking every single participant to put in their bit, because then it will be a complete nightmare to work out what's going on, I assume. But all the same, I think there's some room for coming up with more versatility in categories than just those 4 that we've inherited from mainstream Western scholarship. So I think that hopefully I've persuaded you that the geography of philosophy has huge potential to contribute to one of the most important, I think, intellectual projects of the 21st century. What I've suggested is that we should understand decolonizing philosophy as a kind of recentering project, that restores epistemic authority to the local philosophers. And that involves rejecting universalist conception of knowledge, to stop treating the local thought as an extension of the West or global North, and making local thoughts a contributor to knowledge rather than, or a producer of knowledge rather than a consumer. And finally, on the linguistic decolonization front, to stop allowing Western conceptual and linguistic categories and resources to exclusively shape our thinking. And I've suggested that the GPP is already heavily contributing to some of these desiderata and to a certain extent to others, and where we have some great opportunities still to contribute in making local thought a contributor to knowledge rather than just a consumer or an experimental site, and thereby restoring the epistemic authority to local philosophical voices. So basically, I'm seeing a very bright future ahead, and I hope that you guys are going to apply for another Templeton grant and we can do all of this stuff together. Thank you very much.